also like Thank you. And I would also like to ask everybody that since we're doing a pan-European campaign and we're trying to mobilize as many young people as we can, we would like to know where everybody is from. So if you could put your country up behind your name, that would be really nice. So we can figure out or change your name to your organization or yourself, because we know then who is in the meeting. Um, yeah, just to for some those were some administrative comments. So now to get into it today, as I said, we are doing the second webinar in our webinar series, and we will be focusing on youth participation and the just energy transition or the just transition in general. And we will do that with our two speakers, Valerie and Valeria, who I will talk to and introduce much more later. So now let's talk a little bit just about the scorecard, about ecofeminism, and about why this is so important for the upcoming EU elections. Next slide, please. Yes. And before we do that, let's see who's in the room. You should be able to see a pop-up and then enter a Mentimeter, and we can see a little bit more about, well, who you are, where you're from. Yes, perfect. I'm seeing it. I don't know if everybody else is, but I'm seeing it. So first question, how are we all feeling about the EU elections? Seeing one scared person. Okay. Oh, okay. We're moving away from just scared. It's a little bit about it. Hopeful. Yeah, well, we're hoping that we'll make it. That's not voted for, but we are hoping that together we will make it. And yeah. Let's get on that. Could we go to the next question? I love that the majority loves the EU, but that's the consensus for today. So now a little bit more about where we're all from. So as I said before, this is a pan-European campaign. We're trying to mobilize as many young people as we can across the whole continent, and also reach as many people as we can with our aids for voting. So it would be really cool to see where everybody's from. And also, again, if I didn't say that yet, for today's session, there's interpretation available in various languages, and you can find that if you go, I think, to the More option, and you can find language interpretation. And our interpreters are very happy to, well, translate this meeting for you today. And today, interpretation is available in French, Polish, Ukrainian, and Spanish, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so I see the majority of the people are from the Netherlands, but there's some other people coming in. So very excited to see that as well. No Polish, French, Spanish, and Ukrainian. Well, perfect. Thank you so much. Also for everybody for today, if you have any questions or anything you want to let us know, please put that in the chat. We can see it and we can answer immediately in the session. Next question, please. So since we're talking about youth participation today, I wanted to generate a word cloud. If you could put in what youth participation means to you. Means together. It's of course inclusivity. It's a big part of it. Let's see if we can get one more response. Otherwise, we can go to the next question. Oh, suddenly seeing a bunch more. Thank you. Yeah, those are all very important aspects of it. Of course, I think Valerie's going to tell us way more about, yeah, what it entails for her. Oh, they're all coming in suddenly. Thank you. We could go to the next one, please. Yes, and then the other topic we are covering today is, of course, the just energy transition. So again, what are the aspects of that that you want to see in policy, or aspects that you think should belong in the just energy transition? Oh, suddenly see, they come as a wave suddenly. Gender equality, collective action. Yes, I'm already seeing a lot of different answers that don't just focus on the energy itself, but go much wider than that. And that's exactly what we're trying to cover here as well. That the transition, just transition, is more than just transitioning. There's a lot of additional factors that we need to take into account, which is also something we'll discuss way more in length later today. But now we can move to the last question. I think this was it, maybe. Yes. So today, as you all know, we're launching our scorecard, which is what we'll get to in about 5 minutes. And the scorecard will serve as a voting aid for young people and everybody, basically. So the question is, would you use this scorecard if there was one available in your country, scoring ecofeminist, scoring political agendas for ecofeminist topics? Yeah, there's some hopeful answers. I would like to. I'm planning it already. Well, for the people who don't know how yet, we're going to go over that. So that's perfect. Yes. Thank you. Could we go back to the presentation, Yasha? Thank you so much. And then to the next slide, please. Yes. So why this scorecard? So as I said, we have made a scorecard. This is the one from the last elections, I think. Yeah, from 2019. And we've made a scorecard basically scoring every political party in the Netherlands that's participating in the EU elections and has a considerable size on ecofeminist topics to go over whether or not they A, address these topics, and B, whether that in their addressing of it, whether they're transformative, whether they're inclusive. And in that way, we've scored every party basically as a voting aid for young people and also to kind of cut through the political jargon to get people to the voting to voting, because the most important part of this election is, of course, that people need to get out and go vote. And the EU elections historically have a very low turnout. Last elections, 2019, it was higher than it's been since the 90s. It was over 50%, which for EU elections is super high. But then today, since our focus is the Netherlands only had a turnout of around 40%. So there's still lots of ground to be gained. Very impressive and very important to this is that young voters really made the difference 5 years ago. So they got out, they got to voting, and because of that, we had this historic turnout, which was over 50%. We'd love to keep it that way. So therefore, we've made this scorecard, but we've also made various toolkits. And could we go to the next slide, please? Yes. And these toolkits all address both politics and ecofeminism, and they are available in various languages. So our scorecard right now is being published in German, French, Spanish, Dutch, and English. And we've also scored the political parties in all of those countries. And our toolkits are also available in various languages. So they all cover politics and ecofeminism. And to go over that quickly, ecofeminism is a lot of things. It's a big term that we can kind of that is yeah, it's kind of a it over it comprises of a lot of separate issues that are part of it. And ecofeminism can be the gender just energy transition, but it can also be intersectional and inclusive decision making, which is also why in the scorecards we look at both energy transition, decision making. We look at ecology. We look at intersectionalism. We look at a bunch of different issues that all fall under ecofeminism, because ecofeminism basically comprises of justice, of climate justice, but also of inclusivity in all forms of decision making. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yes, so these are our toolkits. As I hinted already, we've tried to be part of this pan-European campaign to get more young people out there and to educate young people on the various ecofeminist topics out there. These are past toolkits that we've published, and just a while ago we saw the toolkit that we published on the EU. If anybody's interested to learn more about the EU in general, about the EU elections, about what you can do for these EU elections, you can have a look at our toolkit. They're all online, together with the scorecard. So there's a bunch of information there, and we really invite you to go and educate yourself and read up on it. Next slide, please. Yes, so why does this matter? It matters because there's a lot of important issues on the table right now. As we are approaching these EU elections, the strategic agenda is also going to be reconfigured for the next 5 years. And the EU has a lot of influence in all of our member countries, which means that, for example, in the Netherlands, around 70% of all policy is influenced by the EU. Therefore, very important to go out and vote for your EU representatives, because they influence policy all around. Additionally, we also have the Green Deal, which is on the table, and where there's already a lot of people kind of breaking it down. There is the Pesticide Reduction Act, which was put out of the Green Deal, and it's very important to keep pushing on that deal, to keep pushing it forward. We also have the rise of disinformation on climate and gender especially. There's a lot of disinformation out there, and with social media, it's being circulated very widely, which is why it's so important to educate your young people and to have your young people go out and vote, to have people in power who actually care about that as well. And in addition to that, there's also the rise of far-right populism, which is very important to counter in these upcoming elections, looking at the strategic agenda, looking at the Green Deal, and looking at this disinformation. So in 2019, the young people really made the difference in the elections. We're trying to get that happening again in 2024. And therefore, we have the scorecard, the toolkit, workshops that we organized with it. And we really invite you all to use these voting aids and get out to vote. So we are trying to mobilize our young people. And then if we could go to the next slide, please. Yes, we're trying to mobilize our young people and to mainly also show that politics is very important, but it can be very difficult. So our scorecards, this is the scorecard of this year for the Netherlands, and it cuts through this political jargon and cuts through all the fluff. So the main thing is, when you read these political party manifestos, they can be very long, very difficult, and they say a lot, but actually they don't have any concrete plans, which is why we've analyzed and cut through them to come up with this very clear voting aid, which can be a first step in informing yourself for the EU elections. It makes an ecofeminist analysis available, whereas this very often isn't. And it also makes it easy in one go to see what kind of parties you should be looking at if you want to vote ecofeminist. There, I do have to say that the scorecard is based on purely the political manifestos, which means that it's a voting aid, it's a first step, but it's also a first step in informing yourself, which means that you should always go on, when you look at this voting aid, to go on and look at the actual statements the party makes, look at their voting behavior, look at their campaigns, and see what issues they actually prioritize in their additional communications, since this is purely based on their manifestos, and they are influenced by a lot of other factors as well. We are trying and aiming with this scorecard to make it more available and to show you in one single view, hey, look, for example, one party has a lot of green on their card. That means their policies are both inclusive, transformative, and they actually thought about a lot of these issues, whereas others might not have. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Yes. So a little bit about the EU before we delve into particular topics. It is very important to realize that in the EU, there's over 180 parties and they come from 27 countries, which means that if every party would be in the parliament by themselves, that would get very messy very quickly. Therefore, they've shaped kind of ideological groups where every party is sorted into. For example, all the Green parties, they're together in the Green Group, which means that parties from the Netherlands, Germany, Austria, they all work together within one ideological group. Well, why is that important? It's important because your party will not only subscribe to their own political manifesto, they will also subscribe to the political manifesto of the group. Because a group has a lot of power in the EU. They have lobby power, they have the power to kind of make deals with other groups. And if you're not part of it, or if the group doesn't agree with you, you lose a lot of that political power within the EU. So a party will very often subscribe to a particular group and their ideals to gain some political power, which means that every party, whether or not they say they are influenced by their political group. Therefore, we've also created a voting aid and scorecard for the political groups. It's also on our website, and you can see it there as well. And you can see whether or not your party A votes very green on particular topics in your national card, but then also what their group does in the international pan-European scorecard. Additionally, very interesting to note that some of these political groups even have party discipline, which means that every single group within every single party within it has to vote the same way, or at least will vote the same way, even enlarging their political power over the national parties. So here we see the political groups. There are 7 right now, and then there's the NE group, which is all the parties that didn't affiliate themselves with a particular political group and therefore have way less power within the EU. Next slide, please. Yes. So since we are talking about the Netherlands today, some national context. So the Netherlands has been a part of the EU for a very long time, and they are going to fill 31 out of the 721 seats that we have. And these 31 seats will be filled by the representatives that we choose in our national elections. They've been part of the EU since the foundation of the EGKS, which was in 1952, and they have always been a big promoter of EU integration. Um, the Dutch vote on the 6th of June. As we all know, the elections are spread between the 6th and the 9th, but the Dutch vote on the 6th. And as I said before, they had a rather low voter turnout last time, 41.9%, which is lower than the EU average. So with this scorecard, we are aiming to get more people out there, to get more people voting, and to get that average up. Another interesting thing is that there's a couple of Dutch topics on the agenda this year, which is, for example, the Water Framework Directive, which is an ecofeminist topic in that it talks about water pollution and how the Dutch do not keep to the EU regulations. And they're also talking about the Renewable Energy Directive and the future of that for the Netherlands. We can move to the next slide. Yes. So about our scorecard, to kind of round that off, the focus of the scorecard are these 6 topics. This year, we're talking about the gender just energy transition, the making polluters pay, saying no to toxic chemicals, youth at the decision table, agriculture, and fair trade. So these are the 6 topics that we scored each party on, and we did that using a scoring code book, which can also be found on our website. So as I said before, the voting aid is just a first step. And if you really want to delve into why we gave certain parties certain votes or certain scores, you can look at our website and you can see exactly what statements we looked at and why they got a green, a yellow, or a red score for that. Today, we're focusing on gender just energy transition and youth at the decision table, which we'll delve deeper into with an interview later on. But for now, these are the 6 topics that we'll look at in our scorecard. And if you're interested in any other topics, I would love to refer you to our next webinars as well, because every week we'll be covering 2. Next slide, please. Yes. So to close off on the scorecard, how did we actually score them? As I said before, we used a scorebook. And in that scorebook, you could you could kind of earn 25 points for each topic. If you didn't mention certain things, you got immediately reducted on those issues. So, for example, there were core key terms such as PFAS, Green Deal, justice. If you didn't mention them in relation to any of the specific topics that we talk about, such as energy or um, kind of environmental pollution, and you didn't mention PFAS, you automatically got a point less. So, in light of that, with the code book, we've scored every single political manifesto, and in the end came to the scores of red, yellow, and green. Red means that you, well, didn't mention it, or you had only a few keywords, or you mentioned it, but the plans you proposed were actually detrimental for the issue and actually scourge it the wrong way. Yellow meant that you did cover it, you mentioned some of the keywords, but in the end, your plans weren't transformative, they weren't inclusive, or you mentioned part of it, as I said before. And green meant that you did include it, you mentioned it, you had a transformative plan, your plan was inclusive in nature, and we'd like to see way more of that. So that's kind of the summary of how the scoring works. Again, if you want to delve deeper into it, please do have a look at our code book and you can see exactly where the countries scored well and where they didn't. Okay, I think we can go to the next slide. So, in conclusion, this is what it turned out to be. This is the Dutch Scorecard 2024. And one quick note to make with it, you can see that the PVV has a blue score. That's because at time of scoring, their party program wasn't available yet. It is now. So if you do want to look through their party program and score it yourself using the code book, both are online, both are on our website, and you can have a look at that to see what their plans are. But overall, we see that the scores are as follows. So the party that kind of came out best this election in our scorecard is the Party of the Animals. And following, you can see that there's some yellow, some red popping up. Interestingly, we do see that, a lot of parties that are currently going to be in power, well, they're signing the agreement this week in the Netherlands, they do score rather poorly on our scorecard for the EU, which is an interesting and also worrisome development to see in the country, as we see that ecofeminism is therefore being voted out of politics, whereas that makes it more important to vote very ecofeminist in your EU elections. Another interesting thing that we saw in the scoring is that sometimes a party where you think they would score quite well, they score quite poorly because they mention something, but they don't actually have a plan. There's a lot of EU Parliament manifestos with some flowery language, but not necessarily a concrete plan, an idea, or actual commitments that were being made. So that also explains why some scores might be quite surprising. Okay, and with that, I think we can move to the next slide. Are there any questions? I don't see any in the chat. No, I don't see any in the chat. If you do have a question, please do send it in and we'll have a look and we'll answer it either in the chat or in the webinar. But then if they're not, we can move to the next slide. And I would love to introduce Valeria to you guys. So we're going to have some expert discussion unpacking two of the topics that I just talked about. So the just energy transition and the importance of youth participation. And the first of which will be with Valeria Pelez. She's also a employee at WECF, and she's going to talk to us about the just transition today. So if I could spotlight Valeria, let's see if I can find you. And if you could introduce yourself, Valeria, that would be really great. And thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you, Leonora. Thank you so much for this space. I'm really excited to share with you some knowledge that I have on just energy transition. As you say, I work with WCF in Germany. I am Valeria Peláez Cardona. I am from Colombia, but I'm based in Germany. and I work with the Gender and Climate Advocacy team. Basically, in this team, we work and we participate in all of the political and policy spaces where we discuss, like the parties or countries discuss about climate change and take the decisions to fulfill or to achieve the Paris Agreement and other decisions. So basically, our role is to highlight in all of these spaces the importance to include a gender responsive approach. And of course, one of the biggest or the most popular topics in the last few years, I will say the last 2 years, is just transition. So currently in all the COPs in the climate change conference, at the end of the year, the just transition is one of the hot topics where countries and parties are committed to discuss how we are going to move away from fossil fuels to renewables or more green energy sources. So I just want to first apologize because I have a cold, so sometimes I have to stop for drinking water as now. I'm really sorry. So yeah, I think this exercise, unfortunately, I cannot vote because I'm Colombian and I don't have a European Union citizenship. But I found it really, really amazing. It's a really interesting exercise, and it's a really good way to I think to also increase the participation because and to fight against disinformation that I can understand and assume that is a lot right now, just 2 weeks before elections. So I think it's really, really good initiative. So congratulations for that to all the team that has done this good exercise.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you again for being with us. I think it's highly interesting that you're going to talk about the just transition since this is such a hot topic right now. So before we delve into that, I would like to ask you what you found most surprising about the scorecard. I know we scored one of the topics that you are very familiar with. Anything that popped up? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, well, I will say in the methodology, I think it's a really and how you present the results. I think in just one pager, that was the first thing that pops up to me. Like it's really user friendly. It's like anyone can read it, especially like young people that maybe is not involved in these topics, but that are really important and relevant right now. I think it's a really good methodology. It's really easy. It's really it's like the use is and how you can disseminate it is really easy to use it. So that's the first thing. And also like the topics, like the demands, I found it like it's a really good way to summarize the ecofeminist demands and of course the gender just energy transition. And then we are going to discuss about that, what you like the description that is there. I think is really in this just 5 lines, you try to summarize what the just transition is. And it's not just to move from one source to another. It's not just like eliminating polluting industries, but it's like a big discussion that includes social, economic, and environmental, of course, but also cultural aspects. So I think that's great. Unfortunately, I don't know like the parties of the Netherlands. I am not familiar with that, so I cannot say like that shocked me. Like this party is really green at the Netherlands, but at the European Union level, it's not so green. But as you say, I like I assume that happened, and it's shocking, of course, and it's also interesting and funny how to you can understand that the international policy and politics is so different as the national and local affairs. So that's also good to know and to understand how it works.
Thank you. I think it's really, yeah, it's really interesting what you say as well, on that. We've tried to summarize it very shortly. So thank you, first of all, for your loving, your loving comment on the scorecard. But to move into the just transition, because you said that it's very important to understand that it's not just moving from one to the next source, but it's understanding these socioeconomic, cultural, and environmental effects that are also there. We've tried to summarize it, but I'm sure you can tell us much more.
Yeah, sure. Well, we need to understand that that the energy transition is not something that is going to happen in the future. It's something that is currently happening. It's something that is now happening, and we need to be really focused on this. As citizens, we need to ask our countries that they do it in a really just, with the just approach. So countries are committed to decarbonize in alignment with the Paris Agreement's imperative to limit global warming to 1.5 Celsius degrees above pre-industrial levels. But the shift away from fossil fuels requires like a comprehensive and a systematic approach. And then what we say about just is like that the central to this transition is the integration of justice and equity, that ensuring that the socioeconomic restructuring addresses like the fundamental roots of inequality. So that's why we say this is not so simple. This is not so easy just to like change fossil fuels from solar or from wind or another kind of source of energy, but it's something that involves like human rights, involves cultural rights also, indigenous peoples, participation, local communities. So then we need to understand that the term just underscore the imperative of abandoning the long-standing practice of sacrifice the well-being of marginalized groups to benefit others, a pattern that is inherent in the fossil fuels driven economies. So a just transition entails active involvement in decision making by women, youth, indigenous peoples, and local communities. And it requires dedication to social justice and equity across all spheres. So when we are talking about energy, we need to cover not only the access to energy, not only the source of the energy, but also the use, the distribution, the commercialization, how people is going to use, how people is going to take advantage of these new sources, technologies, or innovations. So we also need to establish, and that's why the ecofeminism is like to establish a feminist economy grounded in principles of care. And we also, moreover, the just transition requires the implementation of mechanisms for accountability that safeguard human and labor rights. And that's also important. And like this discussion of energy just transition is also a discussion that is in the roots of labor rights. The first people that start talking about this are the workers, and they start like saying, if we are going to move from one industry to another, we need to talk about justice, and we need to talk about human rights, and we need to talk about people-oriented approach, because there are also with this just change of paradigm, we are going to lose a lot of jobs. We need reskilling in the workforce. We need to include women in the workforce. So that's why we say this is more broad than just like energy. So then we are also talking about foster poverty alleviation and promote dignified employment. So additionally, achieving food and energy sovereignty is paramount, ensuring that individuals and communities have equitable access to the resources necessary for dignified living. For example, for instance, in Europe, there are 54 million of people that lives under energy poverty. And in the world, there are 760 million of people that lives without electricity, and 2.6 billion of people that doesn't have clean cooking systems. So then the energy transition is important because highlights the inequality that is behind the industry of fossil fuels, or also highlights the inequality that is always like in our daily basis, also using electricity. And then that only not like this fossil fuels industry not only creates or generates devastating effects in the environment, but also suppress thousands of millions of peoples to indignity. So hence, we are addressing the concept of energy, of an energy just transition. Our focus, our ecofeminist focus, extends beyond the mere adoption of renewable energy sources, and instead we delve into the multiple implications of this transition on human rights, sustainability, and overall well-being. So we advocate for policies and strategies that prioritize the needs of individuals and communities. And then, of course, we include gender, particularly the most vulnerable among us. And therefore, the transition must be inclusive, ensuring that no one is marginalized or is left behind. So the demand for just energy transition must be made to ensure that the shift to green and or renewable energies doesn't contribute to perpetuate the inequalities or inequities created by the system based on fossil fuels. And thus, the justice approach focuses on questioning the social aspects of the transition, understanding the context and needs, as well as local and capacities and knowledge, to identify who can be affected by these solutions and evaluate which processes can be implemented to reveal and to reduce such injustices.
Wow, thank you so much for that. I think it's really interesting how you highlight that there's so many different aspects to it that we need to include, and that we cannot just focus on that one transition, but also all the different implications it can have, from access to poverty to um, labor rights to human rights. There's so many different factors to take into account. So one last question to round it off, because we are talking about participation today, and we were talking about participation, well, when we met earlier, and also in general with elections. You said that active involvement is the most important thing, that people are represented in that process, and that we must make sure that the shift doesn't perpetrate these issues. So, what would be a way in which you think that this can happen? Like, would it be voting only, or is there other ways that you're working on?
No, I think that we have like really, we work with communities and we work with local people from the global south especially, and there are like really good examples and there are really good cases how people can organize and participate in all of the decision making, not only how we are going to use energy and how we are going to participate in this energy transition, but also how we are going to control the resources. And this is also important. Like, a way to participate is, for example, to organize a cooperative, an energy cooperative. There is like this model of decentralized energy systems that is based in renewables, solar, most of the cases, and then you can create in your neighborhood like this cooperative that you have solar panels. You install. I am like this is a like how you say, like parentheses, break I am not an expert in energy or like a technician, so I can explain this really well. But I have worked with cooperatives that they install solar panels in their houses and they distribute the energy just in the community. So they are like the owners of the resources, and they also choose how they are going to distribute and how they are going to use the energy. And this, for example, for the gender approach is really important, because women, we are in charge of all the care work, and care work implies cooking, lighting, and heating. So we need always to be in charge of the energy or the electricity. So when we are involved in the decision making on how we are going to control the resources, of course, there is a way to be more equitable and inclusive with gender, with women and gender. Then we are not going to spend a lot of time, a lot of hours trying to find electricity to take care of our family or relatives. So when we are involved in the decision making of all of this process, how we are going to use energy is a good way to participate. It's a good way to ensure that this energy transition is going to be just, is going to be inclusive, and it's going to also to respond to the needs of our communities. This is an example that I think also applies for rural communities in Europe. When you are, for example, you go like your party or your country is like trying to implement a policy of solar panels, and you go to a rural community, but they never train the community or they never ask them for what do you need electricity, and they just implement something that is doesn't have like the strong capacity, or they doesn't generate all the energy that they need, for example, to produce food or to produce their the work that they're doing in the daily basis. The community is not going to use it if they are not training for example, to maintain and to repair the solar panels, at the end is money that is going to be wasted, if we can call it like that, because after 3 years or 4 years, when the solar panel ruins, it's not going to work anymore, and the community is going just to shift again to fossil fuels, because it's the path dependency that we have. It's the only thing that we know. So, and also if women that they use the energy sources, they are not trained, we are not trained to like how to manipulate this technology, these innovations, is the same. They are not going to use it, and they're not going to be included in the process.
Thank you so much. I think this is a really interesting thing to delve further into, but unfortunately, we are very short on time today. But thank you for highlighting that, and thank you for stressing the importance of having these people trained, included in the process, and having them part of the conversation, because I think that that's Oh, I see. And good luck with your cold. But thank you so much for making the time today. And unfortunately, because we are short on time, we are going to move on to our second speaker today, which is Valerie, who is going to introduce some more on the field of youth participation. So, Valerie, if I could ask you to introduce yourself as well.
Hi, Nora. Hi, everyone. My name is Valerie. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Ooh, I love it when people ask me to introduce myself, because there's always that question that catches you because you don't know exactly which part of your life you should be talking about. So professionally, I'm trained as a climate policy, so I'm a climate policy expert. But throughout my life, the thing that has moved me the most has been activism. So I've been in activism from a very young age, like I think about 12 or 8, depending, where I cared about social justice because I realized the importance of having my voice out there. So, and youth participation has been a stronghold, a strong part of that, because as a young person that was interested in getting my voice out there, knowing that for some people it was seen as inadequate or not yet mature or not yet ready. To have an expression or an interest or a thought, an idea about how society should be run, which I always thought was a little bit bonkers. So I dedicated my life, and until now I still do, to youth activism and trying to get the voices of young people within decision making. So making sure that young people are not just seen as this bypass citizens that have to wait until they reach a certain age to be taken serious, because young people are citizen, young people have ideas, young people have a perspective that they have to contribute. At the end of the day, society, it's the society to which they live in, and who better to shape that society. So that's pretty much where my work and my inspiration comes from.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. I do get that it's sometimes weird to introduce yourself in that way, but I think it's beautiful to talk about youth participation and then say, who better to have an idea how to shape society. So that's also why we've included it on the scorecard, why we say that it's so important to have youth at that decision table and to hear those voices. So immediately for you, the same question as well. What was something that stood out to you from seeing this scorecard?
Actually, I think the piece that I liked about the scorecard was the fact that when we were talking about youth participation and where you guys were measuring about what are they actually saying about youth participation, it didn't just stop at asking, did they say anything about young people? Because I feel like talking about how young people are the future, or that young people needs to be heard, they have good ideas, that's an easy thing to do. And I feel like politics out there, groups, people, everyone says it, but no one does anything about it. So I think what stood out for me in the scorecard is that you guys went beyond that. You looked at, okay, who said it's important, and then who dedicated space and time and thought about how do we make sure that because it is important, it is taken into account. And unfortunately, because you did that, we can already see how parties have done so badly because it's easy to talk about something. It's harder and much more important to actually dedicate time to being like, okay, because this is important, here, we're going to try this. We're going to create this policy. We're going to put this in place to push it forward. So yeah, That's the thing I liked about the scorecard that really immediately jumped to me, because it's so important that we move the conversation away from just acknowledging the importance of youth participation to actually trying to actively make it make it part of our society.
So it's really interesting that you said it as well, because it's kind of like, yeah, that is what we saw as well, that they all address youth and they all say young people are very important, but there seem to be big barriers because it was a big part of our scorecard was to see whether they actually made those plans, and there seem to be barriers to that. So could you elaborate, what do you think the barriers are for EU policy to really include that youth, so to go beyond the acknowledgement?
So, like, I mean, some of the barriers that we see in youth participation is I like to compare, and I often talk about the importance of including young people in the same way as we had conversation about the inclusion of women in politics, the inclusion of marginalized group, the inclusion of Black people in politics. There was once, like, we sometimes forget it, and I hear constantly people say, but they're young. What do they know? But they're young. They don't yet have the wisdom, but they're young. Or there's all of these elements that is always constantly mentioned. And when I actually look back on all of those criteria that usually people try to use to stop young people from really participating, once upon a time, those were the same argument that stopped women from being included to vote. Once upon a time, that was also the same argument that was made for people of color, that they shouldn't be able to vote or to participate in democracy because they were half a citizen, they were second-class citizen. So for me, that's why it's also very important, because by not creating the right space for young people to get their voice in, we're automatically making them part of a second class. We're automatically classifying them as second-class citizen. And as a young person, I do not think I am a second-class citizen. I have as much as a right to contribute to this society. And I'm so glad, actually, when you asked the question earlier, that someone actually mentioned children's rights within that, because yes, I'm a youth participation activist, and I strongly expand the definition of youth participation beyond just the voting age, beyond young people of the age of 18. It's beyond that. Children and young people have opinions, and if they're able to contribute in our society, we have to come up with innovative ways to get them. I'm not saying that an 8-year-old should have the right to vote. Or if you ask me, to be honest, I'll be like, why not? Why can we not create a space if they can? You know, an 8-year-old can have a better idea than a 70-year-old person at this point, you know? But these are things that we need to talk about within our society. So like creating other ways, like citizen assemblies, proper consultation methodology that has a way to get the voices of young people, that are designed for young people to participate. Another barrier that I think is within the sort of element of youth participation is also, you hear constantly, especially politicians or leaders, saying that, well, young people don't want to participate. Young people don't want to say, like we heard earlier on about the statistics about voting. Yes, when young people came out in 2019 to vote for the European election, it made a difference. Yet again, in the Netherlands, as you said, less young people came out and stuff. So you are probably asking yourself the question, oh yeah, there's an apathy there. But I think the reason why there's an apathy is because young people don't want to participate in society where the perspective is like they're never heard. Like, you know, it's not enough to bring someone in a room and ask them a question and then pat them in the back and be like, oh yeah, we're heard. And then nothing that they've said has ever made a difference. I constantly hear when I talk to different groups of young people and encouraging young people to participate, they're like, but Valerie, is it really going to make a difference? What do they care about me? Like, they don't care about what I say. So that apathy comes from the fact that we create systems and function and structures and tools that we use that do not have a certain accountability back to young people. Once again, I want to be clear here. I'm not saying that the measure to youth participation is that a young person says, we want this and they get it. Life is complex, right? But what I'm saying is like, we need to create a system and accountability in our society where young people can participate in asking, in proposing something and finding a journey through that. Like the Council of Europe has this beautiful 7 level of youth participation where it starts with the information sharing. Of course, in order to participate, you have to be informed. You have to know what you're participating in. You have to know what you're giving your information in. That's one level of participation. And our society at the moment, we're stuck there. Are we even doing it good? No. I can beg a question that we should improve how we even give information to young people. But beyond that, there is another level where we bring them into a room and we ask them a question. What do you think? Why do you think that? And if their answer is not necessarily working in terms of where the project is going back to young people and actually telling them the reason why this didn't go through, that accountability. And I think this is where I just finished, and like last year, I was part of a beautiful team in Ireland where we tried out a different methodology for democratic participation with children. And we worked with young people from the ages of 8. And the beautiful thing about Citizen Assembly was that we created a system of accountability where we got a group of young people to say what they thought needed to happen about biodiversity. Their proposition made it to the parliament, and the parliament had they had the obligation to respond back to these young people, telling them, okay, so your proposition A is taken into account. We think we can make it work. Proposition B, well, because of this and this and this, we cannot make it, you know? And young people had also another chance to respond back on that. That for me is democracy. That for me is participation. That for me is the inclusion. It's not that young people have to get their way in everything, but young people have to understand and see their ideas within the form. So accountability, that's another barrier to youth participation and stuff. I can go on more, but I'll let you ask another question if you want.
But I would love to hear you talk more because I think it's highly frustrating in some ways to hear all these barriers. But I think it is good to be very knowledgeable of them. And again, because of the time, I'm going to move to our last question of today, which is, I know you have a call to action. I think we can kind of gather what it is already, but I'm very curious to hear it from you. What you would encourage all of us to do, and what you would encourage young people to do, but also what you think is most important for our organizations to say to young people uh, with regards to EU elections.
Yeah. So I think my call to action, and especially with regard to the EU election, I think like at first and foremost, go out and vote. Go out and make your voice heard. Like voting is both a right and a responsibility. It is important. If you just look around the world, how many people want that ability, that right to exercise their voice? So voting is one way that we have to exercise our voice and to structure the society that we want. If we want a European Parliament that cares about these eco-feminist topics that we're talking about, we have to go out and actually vote for people that will bring that perspective. Like, I'll push it even further. I'm like, activism, become yourself that person, inspire yourself, not just in voting, but go out and canvas and convince other people on why that's important. Join group, like, come up with your own ideas as young people. We need youth-led ways of dealing with this problem. We need to put it at the face of politics to the point where they cannot refuse anymore. We've done it many times, and I look through history. That's where I get my inspiration. I look through history. There is no change. There is no major political change that has happened in a society where young people were outside of it. Young people were always at the center of it. So any change that we want to see, it will happen both within the structure that we have, which means actually get out there and vote, and outside of the system that we have, which means activism and strengthening our voice and our collaboration with others. So that, for me, that's my call of action to everybody out there. We have one way: go out and vote on the 6th.
Thank you so much. I think that's a really strong message as well. Like, be within and be without the system, but go out and vote. Do what we have to do in our democracy, and I think that's really beautiful. I want to thank you again for being here, and thank you for speaking to us about it. And I think, looking at the time, we are almost at the end of the webinar, even though I'd love to discuss this more and go into it more. But thank you for being here, and for everybody who is also still here and curious now about the EU elections, about our scorecard, about what we did and how we did it. I have put the website in the chat. So there's the scorecards, the toolkit, the code book. It's all on the website. I've put it in the chat. And if you're interested in the other topics that we didn't discuss today and you want to learn more about them, next week on Thursday and the week after, there will be another seminar, for a webinar of an hour, discussing 2 topics every time with very interesting people who will tell us more about it. So I hope to see all of you there, and I want to thank you for being here today, and thank our amazing interpreters as well, who have done a lot of hard work getting it in all the different language and available and accessible to everybody. So reach out to your friends, reach out to fellow people who might be interested, and I hope to see you next time.
Thank you.